The scalding hot latte splashed across my chest. It soaked through my cheap white blouse. It burned my skin. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the shame. I stood in the center of the design floor of Aurelia Mode. It was the most prestigious fashion house in Manhattan. 50 floors of glass and steel overlooking Central Park. And I was on my knees. Jessica Vane stood over me. She was the creative director. She was 30 years old. She was beautiful. And she was a monster. She looked down at me with eyes like cold blue glass. She did not apologize for throwing the coffee. She did not ask if I was hurt. She simply pointed at her $600 Prada shoes. She noted that a drop of milk had splattered onto her heel. She commanded me to clean it. She told me to use my sleeve. The entire office went silent. 50 designers stopped working. They watched from behind their monitors. They held their breath. No one moved to help me. They were too afraid of her. I was Rachel. To them, I was just the 50-year-old intern. I was the woman with gray hair and clothes from a thrift store. I was the coffee runner, the photocopy girl, the office joke. I hesitated. I looked up at Jessica. I tried to maintain a shred of dignity. I told her that I was here to learn design, not to shine shoes. Jessica laughed. It was a sharp, cruel sound that echoed off the glass walls. She turned to the room. She announced that the intern had a voice. She asked the room if anyone cared what the intern had to say. Silence. Jessica turned back to me. Her smile vanished. She leaned down. Her expensive perfume smelled of orchids and venom. She whispered that I was useless. She told me that I was a relic. She told me that the only reason I was hired was to meet a diversity quota for senior citizens. Then, she reached for the leather portfolio tucked under my arm. My breath hitched. That portfolio contained my life. It contained 300 sketches. It held the designs for the ethereal collection, designs I had worked on for 6 months in the shadows. I tried to pull it back. I begged her not to touch it. I explained that it was personal property. Jessica snatched it from my grip. Her nails dug into the leather. She opened it. She scanned the first page, then the second. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second. I saw the recognition. I saw the shock. She knew these designs were brilliant. She knew they were better than anything she had drawn in 5 years. However, she did not compliment me. She did not offer me a promotion. She did exactly what a predator does when it finds prey. She stole it. She ripped the pages out of the binder. Rrrr. The sound was like a bone breaking in the quiet room. Rrrr. She tore out another one. She crumpled the empty leather binder and threw it in the trash can. She held my drawings against her chest. She looked at me with a triumphant sneer. She told me that these designs were now company property. She told me that Aurelia Mode owned everything I created while on the clock, even my thoughts. Then, she delivered the final blow. She checked her diamond watch. She announced that she had a board meeting in 1 hour with the new majority owner. She said she needed to present a new collection to save her job, and she just found it. My blood turned to ice. She was going to present my work as her own. She was going to take the credit for my genius, and she was going to use it to secure a $1 million bonus. I stood up. My legs were shaking. I told her she could not do this. I told her it was theft. I threatened to go to human resources. Jessica stepped closer. She invaded my personal space. She poked a manicured finger into my chest. She informed me that human resources worked for her. She informed me that no one would believe a senile intern over a star creative director. Then, she pointed to the elevators. She fired me. She ordered me to clear out my desk. She gave me 5 minutes to leave the building before she called security. She turned her back on me. She walked away. Her heels clicked rhythmically on the marble floor. Click, click, click. She waved the sheaf of my drawings in the air like a trophy. She shouted for her assistant to scan them immediately. She shouted that she had just saved the spring season. I stood there. Coffee dripped from my blouse onto the floor. I felt the pitying stares of my coworkers. I felt the weight of total defeat. I turned around. I walked to the elevator. I pressed the down button. The doors opened. I stepped inside. I watched the doors slide shut. The face of Jessica Vane disappeared from view. The elevator began to descend. Down. Down to the lobby. Down to the street. Down to the bottom. However, Jessica made a critical calculation error. She judged me by my cheap shoes. She judged me by my gray hair. She thought she had broken me. She thought she had just discarded a piece of trash. She did not know the truth. She did not know that Rachel Sterling was not my real name. She did not know that I did not need this job for the money. I had not checked my bank account in weeks, but the last time I checked, the balance was 9 figures. I looked at my reflection in the polished metal of the elevator doors. I wiped the latte stain from my chest. I straightened my spine. The trembling in my hands stopped. The sadness in my eyes evaporated. It was replaced by something colder, something sharper. I was not an intern. I was Rachel Vander Woodson. I was the founder of the Obsidian Capital Group. I was the entity that had secretly purchased the controlling stake of Aurelia Mode 3 days ago. I had come undercover to see if the rumors were true. The rumors that the creative director was a tyrant. The rumors that the company culture was toxic. I had seen enough. I had seen the rot at the core of the apple. The elevator dinged. The doors opened to the lobby. I walked out onto 5th Avenue. The cold New York air hit my face. I pulled my burner phone from my pocket. I dialed a number I had not called in 6 months. A voice answered immediately. It was deep and professional. It was Marcus, my chief legal counsel. He asked if the experiment was over. I looked up at the glass skyscraper. I looked at the 50th floor where Jessica was currently stealing my life's work. I spoke into the phone. My voice was steady. I told Marcus to ready the car. I told him to bring the paperwork. I told him to bring the termination clause. Marcus paused. He asked if I wanted to go home and change first. He asked if I wanted to wash up. I looked down at my coffee-stained blouse. I smiled. It was a smile that would have made a shark swim away in fear. I told him no. I told him I was going to the board meeting exactly like this. I told him I wanted them to smell the coffee, because in 45 minutes, Jessica Vane was going to present my designs to the new owner. She was going to present them to me, and I was going to make sure it was a performance she would never forget. The game was over. The hunt was on. A sleek black limousine pulled up to the curb. It glided through the chaotic traffic of 5th Avenue like a phantom. It stopped exactly in front of me. The back door opened. Marcus stepped out. He was 6 feet tall. He wore a suit that cost more than Jessica Vanna's annual salary. He looked at the coffee stain on my shirt. He looked at my messy gray hair. He did not flinch. He simply bowed his head in respect. He held the door open for me. I slid into the cool leather interior. The heavy door thudded shut. Thump. The noise of the city vanished. I was enveloped in silence and safety. Marcus sat across from me. He opened his briefcase. He handed me a thick tablet. The screen was glowing with data. He informed me that the board meeting had just begun. He told me that the chairman, Mr. Sterling, was already seated. He warned me that Jessica Vane was scheduled to speak in 10 minutes. I looked at the screen. I saw the live security feed from the boardroom on the 50th floor. The camera showed a long mahogany table. 12 men and women in gray suits sat around it. They looked bored. They looked impatient. At the head of the table sat an empty chair. It was the chair reserved for the new majority owner. Me. I watched Jessica enter the room on the screen. She was smiling. She was confident. She placed my portfolio on the table. She began to shake hands with the board members. She looked like a queen holding court. Marcus cleared his throat. He asked me if I wanted the security team to clear the floor first. He offered to have Jessica removed by force. I shook my head. I told him that would be too easy. I told him I wanted her to start her presentation. I wanted her to dig her own grave. I wanted to catch her in the act of fraud. I looked down at my hands. They were calloused from 3 weeks of manual labor. They were stained with ink and coffee. I thought about why I bought this company. I did not buy it for the profits. I bought it because Aurelia Mode used to mean something. It used to be about art. It used to be about beauty. But under Jessica's reign, it had become a factory of fear. I had seen talented young designers cry in the bathroom. I had seen pregnant women fired for taking doctor appointments. I had seen a culture of silence and abuse. Today, that culture was going to die. I handed the tablet back to Marcus. I told him to drive around the block one time. I told him I needed 5 minutes to prepare. Marcus nodded. He tapped on the glass partition. The driver accelerated. The car moved smoothly into traffic. I closed my eyes. I visualized the outcome. I did not feel anger anymore. I felt a cold and precise determination. I was a surgeon. Jessica was the tumor. And I was about to perform an operation without anesthesia. The car circled the block. It returned to the main entrance. The doorman rushed to open the car door. He expected a celebrity. He expected a politician. Instead, he saw me, the crazy intern who was fired 20 minutes ago. His jaw dropped. He tried to block my path. He told me I was not allowed back on the premises. He told me that Jessica had put my name on the blacklist. Marcus stepped out behind me. He adjusted his tie. He looked at the doorman with eyes of steel. He informed the doorman that he was speaking to the owner of the building. He advised the man to step aside if he wanted to keep his pension. The doorman froze. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the limousine. Then he looked at me. He saw the change in my posture. He saw the fire in my eyes. He stepped back. He held the door open. I walked into the lobby. My sneakers squeaked on the polished marble. Squeak, squeak. People stared. The receptionists whispered behind their hands. They pointed at the coffee stain. They laughed. Let them laugh. They were laughing at a ghost. I walked to the private elevator bank. These elevators were reserved for executives only. They required a key card. I did not have a key card. I had something better. Marcus walked past me. He placed his hand on the biometric scanner. The system beeped. A green light flashed. Access granted. Welcome, administrator. The gold doors slid open. We stepped inside. There were no buttons. There was only one destination. The penthouse level. The boardroom. The elevator began to rise. My stomach dropped. But my resolve hardened. I checked my reflection one last time. The latte stain was drying. It looked like a jagged scar across my heart. Good. It was evidence. The elevator slowed. The display showed the 50th floor. I turned to Marcus. I gave him his final instructions. I told him to wait in the hallway. I told him to enter only when I gave the signal. The signal was intellectual property. Marcus nodded. He adjusted his cuffs. He told me to give them hell. Ping. The elevator stopped. The doors opened. I stepped out into the hallway. It was quiet up here. The carpet was thick and plush. The air smelled of money and fresh lilies. Double oak doors stood at the end of the corridor. Behind those doors was my future. And Jessica's end. I could hear her voice through the wood. She was speaking. Her tone was passionate. She was selling the lie. I walked toward the doors. I did not rush. I did not sneak. I walked with the heavy steps of execution. 2 security guards stood outside the boardroom. They were large men. They saw me approaching. They recognized the fired intern. They stepped forward to intercept me. They reached for their radios. They prepared to grab my arms. However, I did not stop. I did not slow down. I looked the first guard in the eye. I held up a single finger. I did not speak. I simply projected pure authority. The guard hesitated. He had seen that look before. He had seen it on billionaires and generals. He did not understand why an intern had that look, but his instinct told him to freeze. I walked past him. I reached for the brass handles of the double doors. My hands were steady. I took a deep breath. I was not Rachel the intern anymore. I was the storm. I pushed the heavy doors open. Bang! They swung wide and hit the walls with a thunderous crash. The sound filled the boardroom. Every head turned. 12 board members gasped. The chairman dropped his pen. And at the front of the room, Jessica Vane froze. She was holding my sketch in her hand. Her mouth hung open. She looked at me with a mixture of shock and fury. She recovered quickly. She slammed her hand on the table. She screamed at me. She demanded to know how I got past security. She ordered me to get out. I did not leave. I stepped into the room. I walked onto the Persian rug. I looked at the faces of the most powerful people in fashion. Then I looked at Jessica. I smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile. I spoke 4 words that changed the atmosphere of the room. Please, continue your presentation. Jessica Vane stared at me. Her face turned a deep shade of crimson. She looked like a statue carved from rage. She did not recognize the authority in my voice. She only saw the coffee stain on my shirt. She turned to the security guards. She pointed a trembling finger at my face. She screamed at them to do their jobs. She ordered them to throw the crazy woman out of the window. The guards stepped forward. Their heavy boots thudded against the carpet. Thud, thud. They reached for my arms. However, I did not flinch. I did not step back. I raised my hand in a sharp, halting motion. I locked eyes with the chairman, Mr. Sterling. He was sitting at the head of the table. He was the only person in the room who knew the truth. I spoke to him directly. I ignored Jessica completely. I asked him if he wanted to see the spring collection. I asked him if he wanted to meet the true designer. Mr. Sterling looked at me. He looked at the guards. He cleared his throat. He waved his hand at the security team. He ordered them to stand down. He told them to wait by the door. Jessica gasped. She looked at the chairman with wide eyes. She demanded to know what was happening. She reminded him that I was a terminated employee. She called me a mental patient. Mr. Sterling did not answer her. He leaned back in his leather chair. He steepled his fingers. He told Jessica to answer my questions. He said he found the situation amusing. Jessica stiffened. She realized she was losing control of the room. She clutched my portfolio to her chest. She turned to face me. Her eyes narrowed into slits. She hissed that she had nothing to hide. She challenged me to speak. I walked toward the mahogany table. I moved slowly. I circled her like a shark circling a swimmer. I stopped right next to her. I could smell her fear beneath the expensive perfume. I pointed to the first sketch in her hand. It was a drawing of an evening gown. It featured a complex cascading hemline. I asked her to explain the fabric choice. Jessica scoffed. She rolled her eyes at the board members. She acted as if the question was beneath her. She answered confidently. She said it was silk chiffon. She said she chose it for its lightness. I shook my head. I tutted softly. I told the room that she was wrong. I explained that silk chiffon would collapse under the weight of the beading. I explained that the design required structural organza. I revealed that I had written that specification in the margin of the page. Jessica paled. She quickly flipped the page. She covered the margin with her thumb. She stammered. She claimed she changed her mind this morning. I did not let her breathe. I pointed to the second sketch. It was a structured blazer with asymmetric lapels. I asked her about the inspiration. I asked her where she was when she drew it. Jessica lifted her chin. She lied with the ease of a sociopath. She told a story about a trip to Paris. She described the architecture of the Louvre. She claimed the sharp lines of the museum inspired the jacket. The board members nodded. They were captivated by her story. But it was a trap. I smiled. I leaned closer to her. I whispered that the jacket was not inspired by Paris. I told her it was inspired by a rusted fire escape in the Bronx. I told her I drew it 3 days ago while sitting on a park bench. I told her that if she looked closely at the buttons in the drawing, she would see a pattern. Jessica frowned. She squinted at the paper. She brought the sketch closer to her face. I announced to the room what she was looking at. I told them the buttons were not random. I told them I had hidden a microscopic detail in every single drawing. I told them I always signed my work. Jessica froze. Her hands began to shake violently. The paper rattled. She scanned the drawing frantically. She looked for a signature. She looked for a name. I raised my voice. I addressed the entire board. I told them to look at the pocket of the blazer in the sketch. I told them the stitching on the pocket formed a set of initials. They were not JV, for Jessica Vane. They were R. S. Jessica saw it. Her eyes went wide. She saw the tiny, interlaced letters hidden in the cross-hatching. She gasped. She dropped the page as if it were burning hot. It fluttered to the floor. Panic exploded in her eyes. She looked at the board members. They were whispering. They were looking at her with suspicion. The illusion was cracking. However, Jessica was a fighter. She was cornered, but she was vicious. She grabbed a glass of water from the table. She splashed it over the remaining drawings. She tried to ruin the ink. She tried to destroy the evidence. She screamed that I had forged the drawings. She screamed that I had broken into her office and altered her work. She pointed at my clothes. She shouted that no one should trust a woman who looked like a beggar. She played the victim card. She began to cry fake tears. She turned to the chairman. She begged him to save the company. She begged him to remove me. I watched her crumble. I watched her dignity dissolve into a puddle of water and ink. It was pathetic. But it was not enough. I needed to finish this. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out my burner phone. I checked the time. It was time for the final blow. I looked at the heavy oak doors. I spoke the signal word clearly and loudly. My voice cut through Jessica's sobbing. Intellectual property. Boom! The double doors flew open again. Marcus stepped into the room. He was not alone. He was followed by 2 men in dark suits. They were not security guards. They were federal agents. They wore badges on their belts. Jessica stopped crying. She looked at the agents. She looked at Marcus. She looked at me. Confusion washed over her face. Marcus walked to the head of the table. He placed a golden briefcase in front of me. Click. Click. He opened the latches. He turned the case toward the board. I reached into the case. I pulled out a single document. It was thick. It was bound in blue leather. It was the deed of ownership. I threw the document onto the center of the table. Thwack. It slid across the polished wood. It stopped directly in front of Jessica. I looked her in the eye. My expression was stone cold. I told her to pick it up. I told her to read the first line. Jessica hesitated. Her hand trembled as she reached for the blue folder. She opened it. She read the text. Her face lost all color. Her lips turned blue. She whispered the words written on the page: Owner and Chief Executive Officer. Rachel Sterling. She looked up at me. The realization hit her like a freight train. I was not the intern. I was the boss. I was the woman who signed her paychecks. I was the woman who owned the building she was standing in. I stepped closer. I leaned down until our faces were inches apart. I spoke softly. I spoke so only she and the board could hear. I told her that she was right about one thing. I told her that Aurelia Mode owned everything created by its employees. I told her that meant I owned her, and I was about to foreclose. Then, I turned to the federal agents. I pointed at Jessica. I gave the command. Arrest her. Jessica laughed. It was a high, hysterical sound. She looked at the federal agents. She looked at the handcuffs on their belts. She shook her head violently. She told them this was ridiculous. She claimed that stealing a sketch was a civil matter. She argued that intellectual property theft was not a federal crime. She turned to the board members. She begged them to intervene. She told them that arresting their star designer would tank the stock price. The board members shifted in their seats. They looked nervous. They looked at me. They were wondering if she was right. They were wondering if I had gone too far. However, I did not waver. I walked to the head of the table. I stood next to Marcus. I placed my hand on the golden briefcase. I looked at Jessica with pity. I told her she was absolutely right. I admitted that stealing my drawings was not a reason for the FBI to be here. I told her that was just the appetizer. I told her we were here for the main course. Then, I nodded to Marcus. He tapped a key on the laptop connected to the room's projector. Click. The screen behind me changed. The live feed of the boardroom disappeared. It was replaced by a complex spreadsheet. Rows of numbers flashed in red. Bank routing numbers, offshore account details, wire transfer timestamps. Jessica looked at the screen. Her arrogance evaporated instantly. Her knees buckled. She grabbed the edge of the table to support herself. She recognized those numbers. I pointed to the screen. I explained the data to the silent room. I revealed that for the past 2 years, Aurelia Mode had been leaking money. I revealed that $5 million had vanished from the fabric procurement budget. I revealed that the money was sent to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. Jessica shouted. She interrupted me. She screamed that she knew nothing about it. She claimed her signature was forged. She claimed it was a clerical error. I silenced her with a raised hand. I told her to look at the name of the shell company. The name on the screen was Vane Consulting. I stepped closer to her. I lowered my voice to a dangerous whisper. I told her that interns hear everything. I told her that while she was making me fetch her lattes, she was making phone calls. I told her she left her office door open because she thought I was too stupid to understand. I told her she thought I was invisible. But I was listening. I heard her authorize the transfers. I heard her brag to her broker. I heard her laugh about buying a villa in Tuscany with stolen company funds. Jessica was breathing hard. Sweat beaded on her forehead. She looked like a trapped animal. She looked for an exit, but the agents blocked the door. She tried a different tactic. She tried to negotiate. She looked at me with desperate eyes. She offered to pay it back. She offered to resign quietly. She promised to disappear if I called off the dogs. I laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. I told her it was too late for negotiations. I told her that embezzlement was bad, but treason was worse. Jessica froze. She asked what I meant. I signaled Marcus again. Click. The screen changed. A video file began to play. The audio filled the room. It was a grainy recording. It was taken from a hidden camera inside a coffee shop. The date stamp was from 3 days ago. The video showed Jessica sitting at a table. She was wearing sunglasses. She was sliding a USB drive across the table to a man in a gray suit. The man was the CEO of our biggest competitor, Obsidian Rivals. In the video, Jessica spoke clearly. She offered to sell the entire spring collection for $2 million. She promised to sabotage Aurelia Mode from the inside. She called her own company a sinking ship. The board members gasped. This was corporate espionage. This was the ultimate betrayal. The chairman stood up. His face was purple with rage. He shouted that she was a traitor. Jessica stared at the video. She looked at the man in the gray suit on the screen. She looked at me. A horrifying realization began to dawn on her. I smiled. I walked over to the screen. I pointed at the man in the gray suit. I asked her if she recognized him. She nodded slowly. She said he was the buyer. She said he paid her in cash. I shook my head. I told her she was wrong. I told her that man did not work for Obsidian rivals. I told her that man worked for me. The room went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. I revealed the final twist. I told her that I set up the buy. I told her that I was the one who purchased the stolen secrets. I told her that every dollar she received was marked by the FBI. I told her that I had the serial numbers of the bills she hid in her safe. It was a sting operation. From the very beginning, I didn't just buy the company to fire her. I bought the company to put her in a cage. Jessica screamed. It was a primal sound of pure defeat. She lunged at me. She raised her manicured claws. She wanted to hurt me. She wanted to erase the smile from my face. "You witch!" she shrieked. She crossed the distance between us in a second. However, she never reached me. The federal agents moved with lightning speed. They intercepted her. One agent grabbed her arm. The other grabbed her waist. They slammed her against the mahogany table. Bang! Her face pressed against the polished wood. Her expensive makeup smeared on the surface. The agent pulled her arms behind her back. Click! Click! The handcuffs locked into place. The cold steel bit into her wrists. Jessica thrashed. She kicked her legs. She lost one of her $600 Prada shoes. It flew across the room and hit the wall. Thud. I walked over to the shoe. I picked it up. I looked at the heel. The drop of milk I had cleaned earlier was gone. But the shoe was scuffed. It was ruined. I walked back to the table. I looked down at Jessica. She was pinned. She was panting. Her hair was a mess. Her dress was twisted. She looked up at me with eyes full of hatred. I held up the shoe. I looked at it. Then I looked at her. I spoke softly. I told her she forgot something. I told her she forgot to say thank you. I told her I cleaned her shoe, but I was about to clean house. I dropped the shoe on the floor next to her head. Clatter. I turned to the agents. I gave them a nod. I told them to take out the trash. The agents hauled her up. They dragged her toward the door. She kicked. She screamed. She cursed my name. She cursed the company. She sounded like a banshee. The board members watched in silence. They were terrified. They were impressed. They watched the woman who ruled them with fear get dragged away like a common criminal. The doors slammed shut behind her. Boom! The screaming was cut off. Silence returned to the boardroom. I stood at the head of the table. I adjusted my coffee-stained blouse. I looked at the 12 empty faces staring at me. They were waiting. They were waiting for the axe to fall on them. I looked at the chairman. He was sweating. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket. He wiped his brow. He tried to smile. He welcomed me to the company. He complimented my strategy. I did not smile back. I walked to the head of the table. I sat down in the chairman's chair. I placed my hands on the wood. I looked at each of them, one by one. I told them the show was not over. I told them Jessica was just the symptom. I told them they were the disease. I told them that an intern sees everything, and I had seen their files too. I opened the golden briefcase again. I pulled out a second stack of folders. 12 folders. One for each person at the table. I saw the color drain from their faces. I saw the terror in their eyes. Jessica was gone. But the purge had just begun. I slid the first folder to the chairman. I told him to open it. I told him we needed to discuss his expense account. The room was mine. The company was mine. And revenge? Revenge was a dish best served with a latte. The chairman stared at the folder. His hands trembled. The paper rattled against the mahogany table. He looked at the photographs inside. They were clear. They were damning. They showed him on a yacht in the Mediterranean. He was shaking hands with a known money launderer. I leaned back in the leather chair. It was comfortable. It felt like justice. I told the room that Jessica was a thief, but a thief cannot operate without a lookout. I told them that they were the lookouts. The chairman looked up. Sweat dripped down his nose. He tried to bluster. He tried to use his title as a shield. He claimed he was protecting shareholder value. He claimed he didn't know the source of the funds. I silenced him with a stare. I told him that ignorance is not a defense. I told him it is a resignation letter. Marcus stepped forward. He opened the second compartment of the briefcase. He pulled out 12 identical documents. He slid one to each board member. Zip, zip, zip. The sound of paper sliding on wood was the only noise in the room. I explained the terms. They were simple. They were brutal. I demanded their immediate resignation from the board of Aurelia Mode. I demanded the forfeiture of all unvested stock options. I demanded a public apology to the shareholders. The room erupted. The board members shouted. They protested. A woman in a pearl necklace slammed her fist on the table. She screamed that she had a contract. She screamed about her golden parachute. She threatened to sue me for wrongful termination. I waited for them to finish. I let them scream. I let them vent their entitled rage. Then, I dropped the hammer. I picked up the chairman's folder. I held it over the trash can. I told them they had two choices. Option A, they sign the papers and walk out with their dignity intact. They retire to their Hamptons estates and never work in this industry again. Option B, I hand these folders to the federal agents waiting in the hallway. I told them the agents were very interested in the RICO statute. I explained that racketeering charges carry a minimum sentence of 20 years. The woman in the pearls stopped screaming. She looked at the door. She looked at the pen in front of her. The color drained from her face. She realized that her golden parachute had just turned into a prison jumpsuit. She picked up the pen. Scratch, scratch. She signed her name. She pushed the paper away. She stood up. She grabbed her purse. She walked out of the room without looking back. One by one, the others followed. The chairman was the last to sign. He looked at me with eyes full of venom. He signed the document. He threw the pen at the wall. Crack. He stormed out. The boardroom was empty, except for me and Marcus. Marcus gathered the signed documents. He placed them in the briefcase. He smiled. He told me that was the most expensive board meeting in history. He asked me what was next. I stood up. I walked to the window. I looked down at Central Park. The trees looked like tiny broccoli florets from this height. I took a deep breath. The toxicity was gone. The cancer was cut out. But the patient was still critical. I told Marcus we were not done. I told him the head was cut off. But the body needed to know it was safe to breathe again. I turned away from the window. I walked out of the boardroom. I walked back to the elevator. I pressed the button for the design floor. Floor 20. The elevator descended. My heart beat faster than it did in the boardroom. Facing corrupt billionaires was easy. They were predictable. They were motivated by greed. Facing the victims was harder. Ding. The doors opened. The design floor was in chaos. News of the arrest had spread like wildfire. People were huddled in groups. They were whispering. They were looking at the empty office of Jessica Vane. Police tape was already across her door. When I stepped out of the elevator, silence fell over the room. 50 faces turned to look at me. They still saw the intern. They still saw the coffee stain. But they also saw the way I walked. They saw Marcus standing behind me like a bodyguard. I walked to the center of the room. I stood on the same spot where Jessica had humiliated me an hour ago. I looked at the floor. The coffee puddle was still there. No one had cleaned it up. I looked up. I made eye contact with a young man in the front row. His name was Leo. He was a junior pattern cutter. He was the only one who had looked sad when Jessica threw the coffee. I cleared my throat. My voice carried across the silent room. I announced that there had been some changes in management. I announced that Jessica Vane would not be returning. I announced that the board of directors had resigned effective immediately. A gasp rippled through the room. They looked at each other. They looked terrified. They thought the company was collapsing. They thought they were all unemployed. Leo stepped forward. His voice trembled. He asked who was in charge. He asked if the company was closing. I looked at him. I smiled. It was a genuine smile. I told him the company was not closing. I told him it was just waking up. Then, I reached into my pocket. I pulled out my employee ID badge, the cheap plastic card that said Rachel, intern. I looked at it. I unclipped it from my blouse. I threw it into the trash can. Clatter. I introduced myself properly. I told them I was Rachel Sterling. I told them I was the new owner. I told them that the era of fear was over. Shock. Absolute shock. They looked at my gray hair. They looked at my cheap shoes. They could not process the information. I walked over to the trash can where Jessica had thrown my binder. I reached in. I pulled out the crumpled leather portfolio. I smoothed out the wrinkled leather. I held it up. I told them that for too long, This company had valued image over substance. I told them that talent had been crushed by ego. I told them that starting today, the hierarchy was dead. I opened the binder. I pulled out a crumpled sketch. It was the design for the evening gown. I walked over to Leo. I handed him the sketch. I asked him what he thought of the structural integrity. I asked him if he could build it by Friday. Leo looked at the drawing. His eyes widened. He looked at the technical notes in the margin. He looked at me. He saw the genius in the work. He nodded. He said he could build it, but he said he would need help with the beading. I turned to the room. I asked who was the best beater in the building. A quiet woman in the back raised her hand. Her name was Maria. She had been an assistant for 10 years. I told Maria to step forward. I told her she was now the head of embellishment. I told Leo he was now the lead pattern maker. Then, I looked at the rest of the staff. I gave them a promise. I told them that I did not care who they were. I did not care where they came from. I did not care if they were interns or managers. I told them that if they had a good idea, I wanted to see it. I told them that the ethereal collection was canceled. I threw the rest of my sketches on the floor. I told them we were going to start over. We were going to build something new, something honest, and we were going to do it together. For a moment, there was silence. Then, Leo started to clap. Clap. Then Maria joined in. Clap. Clap. Then another person. And another. Soon. The entire room was applauding. It was not the polite applause of a board meeting. It was the loud, messy applause of relief. It was the sound of freedom. I watched them. I felt a lump in my throat. I had my revenge. I had my company. But this was better than money. This was redemption. However, there was one loose end left. I looked at the corner of the room. I saw a shadow moving near the emergency exit. It was Jessica's personal assistant, a woman named Chloe. She was trying to sneak out. She was carrying a hard drive. I signaled Marcus. He moved instantly. He blocked the exit. Chloe froze. She looked at me with deer in headlights eyes. I walked over to her. I gently took the hard drive from her hand. I told her she wasn't going anywhere. I told her I had a special job for her. She trembled. She asked if she was fired. I shook my head. I told her she was not fired. I told her she was going to write a press release. I told her she was going to tell the world exactly what happened today. And then, I told her she was going to get me a coffee. But this time, I told her she was going to make it herself. And she was going to bring one for everyone. The cleanup was done. The rats were gone. Now, it was time to build the castle. 6 months had passed since the purge. It was a Tuesday evening in September. New York Fashion Week. The tent at Bryant Park was packed. 2,000 people sat in the dark. Celebrities, editors, influencers. They were all waiting for the same thing. The return of Aurelia Mode. I stood backstage. I was not wearing a coffee-stained blouse. I was wearing a tailored black tuxedo suit. My gray hair was styled in a sharp, elegant bob. I looked at the monitor. The lights in the auditorium dimmed. The crowd went silent. Music began to thump. It was a deep, industrial bass. It sounded like a heartbeat. The first model stepped onto the runway. She was not wearing the flimsy chiffon dress Jessica had designed. She was wearing a structured architectural coat. It was made of raw wool and hand-dyed silk. It looked like armor. It looked like strength. The crowd gasped. Flashes popped like lightning. Pop, pop, pop. The editors in the front row leaned forward. They recognized the genius immediately. But they did not know who designed it. I looked to my left. Leo was standing there. He was shaking. He was wearing a new suit. He looked like he was about to faint. I placed a hand on his shoulder. I squeezed it gently. I told him to breathe. I told him that this was his moment. Maria stood next to him. She was crying happy tears. She watched the second model walk out. The dress was covered in 10,000 microscopic beads. Each one was sewn by hand. By her team, it shimmered like liquid diamond under the spotlights. The show lasted 12 minutes. It was a triumph. It was a revolution. When the final model walked off the stage, the audience did not just clap, they stood up, a standing ovation. The roar of approval was deafening. Then came the moment of truth, the moment the designer takes the bow. The spotlight swung to the entrance of the runway. The crowd waited for me. They waited for the CEO. They waited for the famous Rachel Sterling. However, I stayed in the shadows. I pushed Leo and Maria forward. I told them to go. I told them the light belonged to them. They stumbled out onto the runway. The crowd cheered even louder. They saw the young pattern maker and the veteran seamstress. They saw the real faces of Aurelia Mode. They saw the truth. I watched from the darkness. I smiled. My work here was done. I had not just saved a company. I had saved a family. But what about Jessica? I walked back to my dressing room. I picked up a newspaper from the table. The New York Times. I turned to page 6. There was a small article at the bottom. Former fashion executive sentenced to 5 years. I read the text. Jessica Vane had pleaded guilty. Fraud, embezzlement, corporate espionage. She was currently residing in the Federal Correctional Institution in Danbury. She was not designing evening gowns anymore. She was working in the prison laundry. She was sewing name tags onto gray jumpsuits. For 12 cents an hour. I folded the newspaper. I felt a deep sense of balance. Karma had not just knocked on her door. It had kicked it down. I walked out of the dressing room. I walked out of the tent. The cool night air of New York hit my face. A black limousine was waiting for me. Marcus stood by the door. He opened it. I slid inside. I looked out the window at the city lights. I thought about the journey. I thought about the coffee stain. I thought about the invisible people. The world tries to tell you who you are by looking at your clothes. They judge you by your title. They judge you by your age. They think that power wears Prada. They are wrong. Power is not what you wear. Power is what you do when no one is watching. Power is the ability to withstand the heat until you become the diamond. I tapped the glass partition. I told the driver to take me home. But then, I saw something on the sidewalk. A young girl was rushing toward the subway. She was carrying 3 coffees in a cardboard tray. She was struggling. She looked tired. She looked like an intern. She tripped. The coffees spilled all over the sidewalk. A man in a suit yelled at her to watch where she was going. I told the driver to stop. I rolled down the window. I called out to the girl. She looked up. She saw the woman in the limousine. She looked terrified. I did not yell. I handed her a napkin through the window. I told her that it was just coffee. I told her that one day, she would own the sidewalk. I told her to keep walking. She stared at me. She nodded. She stood up straighter. She wiped her hands. She walked away with a new purpose in her step. I rolled up the window. The car pulled away. I was Rachel Sterling. I was the CEO undercover, and I was always watching. So here is the lesson. Be careful who you step on. Be careful who you ignore. Because the person fetching your coffee today might be the person signing your termination letter tomorrow. The game is never over. The pieces just change places. I leaned back in the seat. I closed my eyes. I was ready for the next mission. Did Jessica deserve a longer sentence? Or was working in the laundry room the perfect punishment for a fashion snob? Tell me your verdict in the comments below. And if you have ever been underestimated by a boss, hit that like button. I am reading every single story. Subscribe for more tales of karma and revenge. See you in the next one.